Welcome back to Howell Woodwork, and in today's video we're addressing a little bit of a problem that's been going on in my house. About 10 months ago I decided to convert one of my spare bedrooms into a home gym, and it has easily been the best decision I've ever made. Since then, I've always known that I wanted to make something to go into the gym, and over the last 10 months that has become pretty clear. Currently, all of my dumbbells are just scattered across the ground, making them hard to pick up, and they just don't have a home in the gym. And instead of running to Amazon, I figured why not make it myself? So today, you guessed it, we're making a dumbbell rack. Okay, I've already spent some time on the computer drawing up plans and making a cut list for these 3 pieces of rough sawn white oak. I have 2 that are about 1 inch to 1.25 inches, and then I have this one in the middle that is about 3 inches thick. I know that I want the legs of my dumbbell stand to be 2.25 inches thick, which I could achieve by laminating 2 smaller pieces of white oak together, but I already have this big piece, so I might as well use it. I have my cut list laid out to try to get as much out of this big piece as I can, and then whatever I can't get out of this, I will get out of the 2 smaller pieces. The first step is going to be to measure and mark out where I need my rough cuts to be before I take them over to the planer and the joiner to get at least 1 flat face and 1 flat edge on all 3 of these boards before I can start breaking them down even more. Alright, it's admittedly been almost a full week since I started milling down these white oak boards. I took some time off this past weekend to have some fun with some friends, but now I'm back here in the shop and I'm ready to continue breaking down these boards into their final dimensions. You just watched me chop them down to size on the miter saw to make them more manageable in their length, and then took them over to the bandsaw to get the big one cut down in half, and again just to make it more manageable, and I know that it's going to have to be broken down anyway. After the bandsaw, I sent them all through the planer to get 1 face flat, and then took them over to the joiner to get its adjacent edge flat and square to the face that was flattened on the planer. So now I've got a good surface and a good 90-degree reference to take them over to the table saw and get rid of these other rough edges. And after that, I will be able to then start shaping down and cutting out mortises. That was a fair amount of work getting all these pieces down to their final dimensions. You first watched me rip them all down to their final widths on the table saw before bringing them over here to the miter saw to get them all down to their final length, with the exception being those smaller pieces that I chose to take back over to the table saw and that's just because it's a little more comfortable and safer to use the table saw sled to make cuts on smaller pieces than it is over here on the miter saw. That being said, about halfway through ripping down all the pieces on the table saw, I started to realize that there was more dust than usual collecting on the surface, and at first I thought that was just attributed to the fact that the blade is sticking up pretty high out of the table saw and all the dust collection for my table saw is from beneath. But again, I started realizing that it was a little bit too much, so I took a pause, and sure enough, my dust collection hose had clogged up a little bit, and so once I cleared that back out, everything was running smoothly again. We ended up with 6 different types of pieces. 3 of the pieces come in pairs, and that is all going to be for the legs, and then 3 other pieces came in sets of 6, and that is going to be for the 3 separate racks that are going to hold all the dumbbells. So the next step is going to be to make the racks themselves. That way I'll be able to know what their final dimensions are going to be, and then I can start to chop out mortises on the legs themselves, and that'll get us pretty close to being done. But let's get these 3 racks made. All right, I'm back over at the table saw now. You just watched me put together all 3 of the dumbbell racks, so that might give you a little bit of an idea of what they're gonna look like. The dumbbells can easily rest here on the edges, but still allow you to reach in between and grab them. So now that those are out of the way, I moved on to the legs, and so you watched a little bit of me laying out where the dados are going to land on each of these pieces and just making sure that I got all of my angles right. Now that that's all done and everything's marked out clearly, the next step is actually going to be to remove the single ripping blade that's currently in my saw, as well as the single blade brake that comes with the SawStop saw, and that's because I'm going to be switching over to dado so that I'm not having to take several cuts over and over again. A dado stack, if you're not familiar, just makes it a lot easier. You remove a lot more material at once, but in order to do that on a SawStop saw, you have to have a dado brake. It makes it a little bit wider so that if your finger happens to touch the blade, regardless of it being a single blade or 3 to 4 blades in a stack, it's not going to take your finger off. This brake is going to launch itself into the blades, destroy them, and pull it down below the table so nobody gets hurt. But hopefully that doesn't happen. I do have a brand new faceplate here that I'm going to set down, and then once I get all the blades in, I'm going to slowly raise them up so we have a nice zero clearance because we don't want any tear out on the actual legs themselves. After that's all done, they should be able to go together rather easily, and then after that we'll move on to making the dados for the actual racks themselves because they're going to be on a different angle and on the inside of the legs, but we'll worry about that when we get to it. Well, much to my surprise, that went pretty smoothly. Getting all the half lap dados laid out and cut on the legs was a huge step. Now I can turn my attention towards cutting out the dados for the racks themselves to have something to rest on in between the legs. And you'll notice I've gone ahead and laid those out, and that's because the middle one lands right in the middle of this joint. So I wanted to make sure that one was glued up first, so that when I go to take it over to the table saw to cut out the dados, it just acts as one big piece. You'll also notice that I've gone ahead and added a 45-degree chamfer on all the pieces, and that was just a personal decision because I like the way that it kind of accents the joinery and adds a little bit of detail to the overall piece. So the next thing to do is to take these over to the table saw and cut out the dados. Alright, that about wraps things up for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, maybe consider liking and subscribing so you don't miss out on my next video. Thanks.